Welcome to In Her Voice. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am passionate about helping women live authentically by listening to their inner voice. Get ready to be inspired by women of all walks of life that have set aside their should-bes and not good enoughs and are standing in their true voice, the voice of wisdom that each and every one of us has inside. Hello there, and welcome to episode 38 of In Her Voice. My name is Kelly Covert. I'm an inner voice coach and your host as we dive into all kinds of topics related to listening and living by your inner voice. I'm so glad you decided to invite me into your experience today. Thank you. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I am so excited to introduce my guest, Megan Hale, to you today. And we are digging into what it means to be wild and holy. Seriously, you guys, I got so much out of this interview. I can hardly wait for you to hear it. Megan Hale is a former psychotherapist and spiritual relationship coach who works with women and couples to deepen their connection with their truth and each other to create lives and relationships that honor their soul. She's the podcast host of the Enoughness Revolution, a conversation on cultivating worthiness, and Wild and Holy Radio, a spiritual conversation on being your fullest expression and doing your holy work in the world. As you listen today, if you find yourself nodding your head or feeling those goosebumps, I did a couple of times during this interview, please pay it forward and share this with someone you know needs it. Maybe it's your friend who's really been struggling with her own stories and ideas of what it means to be holy. I bet you know someone who could really use this. She will thank you, and so do I. So let's get on to our interview with Megan. Megan Hale, I'm so happy to welcome you to In Her Voice podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
You are so welcome. This is going to be so fun. I've been diving into your website and all of the wonderful things that you have on there on your blog and articles and things like that. And I decided today that where I want to begin and probably return to before the end of this conversation is this idea of wild and holy. You have Wild and Holy Radio. You have a book that's coming out. As women, what does it mean to be wild and holy? And why do we need that?
Oh, this has been my life journey up to this point, and this has kind of two sides to it. It has the self-actualization side of being our fullest expression and our fullest selves, of being fully embodied as to who we're here to be. But there also is this spiritual component of really trusting your own inner voice, of trusting your wisdom, trusting your guidance, and being deeply connected to that source that we all have access to. So for me, my whole life has been about trying to fit in a box so I could be enough.
Yep.
And it's really taken me all of these decades to really realize that enoughness doesn't exist in any box. It actually exists when we let the boxes go, of allowing ourselves to be wild and be our fullest expression. And there is a holiness in that. And what I mean by holiness is not only being worthy and sacred as we are, but also being whole. The word holy means whole. So all of my work is helping women trust themselves so they can be their fullest expression. They can be enough in this world just as they are and who they're here meant to be. But it's also this internal journey of becoming whole and really finding inner peace with who you are as a woman, all of the things that you've been taught to not like about yourself, of actually embracing them and using those as your strength. And it's been a really beautiful journey thus far, and we are just getting started on Wild and Holy Radio, so I can't wait to see where this goes.
What is really intriguing to me about all of that, as a former good girl who checked all of the boxes and who did everything right all of the time,
yes,
is this idea of being wild. You know, I almost picture like like just like being like naked in a river screaming or something like that.
Yes.
Too. So I'm really interested in your own journey into wildness.
This is such a good journey.
Good.
So I've actually had a little bit of a different experience than you, where I actually had, I would say maybe like seven-ish years, almost a decade of actually being really wild, of kind of not really caring what other people thought, but while deeply caring what other people thought, and rebelling against a lot of the pressures and expectations that were being put on me. But this came out in a very like reckless, rebellious way. So for me, wildness wasn't really something that was really safe to do because it created a lot of shame in my life, because my wildness took me down a really dark path of drugs and alcohol and just crazy erratic behavior where I really wasn't honoring myself. And what was really driving the cart at that point in my life was this rebel spirit that I have who was like, you're not going to tell me who to be. You're not going to tell me how to do things. I'm going to do things my way. I don't care if it hurts your feelings. Like, she was coming from a very broken, wounded place. And what ended up happening and kind of healing that part of my journey is I went all the way over to the other side of the spectrum, where I really started playing by the rules to a T, started checking off all the boxes, started to try and prove I was good enough by doing all the right things and doing them to the best of my abilities. So there was a whole lot of pressure of being perfect. So for me at that point, being wild wasn't actually safe because I had seen wildness in my life and it was dangerous and reckless. And I didn't know if I could trust that rebel side of me. She got me in a lot of trouble and she created a lot of hurt and pain for me and other people in my life. So my journey of embracing my wildness now has really been about integrating that rebel soul and learning to trust her again, learning that we have the wisdom that she needed then to be wild, to be her fullest self, but to do it in a way that elevates me instead of kind of pushes me down, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
totally.
It's been really interesting because I've been super, super wild, like in a negative connotation. And then I've been like so in the box of really needing that wildness. And so wild for me has been learning how to embrace that in a way that makes me feel good and free and totally enough as I am.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And I really hear in your words this sort of all or nothing kind of personality. Mm-hmm. And I think that so many of us, women who are perfectionists and chronic overachievers and type A, like we are like that. There are a lot of us out there. We're driven and we're smart and we're intelligent. And how do you figure out how to be in the middle of that? You know what I mean? How do you come into that integration? I mean, what kinds of things did you do to figure that out?
Oh my goodness, there's been a lot of things I've done. I've done a lot of inner child healing. I've done a lot of work with Rebel, who was my adolescent self, who, created a lot of pain. I've had to forgive her, and I've had to realize that she saved my life in a way. And that rebel part of me was actually the truth of my soul, who was really begging to break free and to be herself. And I've had to form a really deep relationship with her and given her room at the table, so to speak, because I need her, because her energy is courageous and bold, and she's here to make change in the world, and she's here to stand up for things that aren't right. Like, she's that strong voice side of me that I tried to dull out for so long because I didn't trust her. So a lot of my work has been learning how to build a relationship with that part of myself, learning how to see her actions from a different perspective and a different viewpoint, and then building in that self-trust and giving her permission, this is huge, giving her permission to express herself in the world now. And so I see her, this energy for me is when I'm feeling scared to speak up because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, when I'm feeling scared of doing something other people are like, oh, I don't think that's a good idea, but like my inner voice is so telling me this is what you need to do. When I am cautious of putting myself out there in a certain way or talking about something that is very political, like Wild and Holy can be very political, especially in the religious realm. My rebel self, she's the one that says, this is here for you to do, and I'm going to give you the courage to do it. So all of us as women, we have that rebel spirit inside of us, but we need to learn how to hear her voice. We need to learn who she is and what she's here to do, what she wants for us, because she's wildly courageous. If we can just simply tap into her energy and let her come to the table. I think for a lot of us, we try and keep her boxed in. We try and keep her like in a locked room somewhere because we don't fully trust her, or we think that we're going to upset people, or we're going to lose relationships, which is a big common thing for a lot of us in being who we are, that people aren't going to like who we are. And so we let that be more powerful than our full truth.
Oh my gosh, I can just hear my mother's voice saying to me, good girls don't do things like that, Kelly.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Well, we all have the good girl definition.
Yeah. And this idea of trust, that trusting all of those parts of us, right? Trusting that inner voice, even when it tells us to do seemingly crazy things, that it's right. Do you have any sort of daily practice or practice in general that you teach people of how to trust that voice more, how to trust that rebel spirit more?
Yeah, so there's actually, when I was really diving into the Enoughness work, which really gave birth to Wild and Holy and all the things that Wild and Holy is bringing into the world now, I led a course that was called Claim Your Enoughness, which was really a journaling course that modeled a lot of my own inner work of getting in touch with this side of myself. And I use a technique called non-dominant journaling. And what that is we write a question to our rebel self, and we switch the pen and let her answer. And what I have found is that this actually really allows you to tap into a different aspect of yourself. And over time, her voice becomes so much more clear, more pronounced. You really get to get a sense of who this part of you is. And over time, you don't really have to switch the pen back and forth anymore because you know how to switch to that side of yourself, just within. And so now I still journal like that. I don't switch my pen back and forth because I don't need to at this point because I'm so connected to this aspect of myself, but I talk to her a lot. And that part of myself is deeply connected to my wisdom. It's connected to my higher source and my idea of God. So to have a practice where you're simply looking within for your own answers is kind of a revolutionary concept for a lot of us, because as women especially, we're taught from a very early age that all the answers exist outside of us. It's with the rule makers, right? It's with the people who know more than us, or the people who are going to grant us acceptance or belonging. And so when we start tuning into your inner self for your own guidance, it's kind of foreign. And you kind of feel like you're talking to yourself and you're a little crazy for a second, which I tell all my students, I'm like, that's totally normal. But if you keep going with it, you really start to get a sense that you have this wise soul in you. And she knows a lot about what she needs you to do or what you're supposed to be doing to be in further alignment with who you're here to be.
Yeah. And that practice of connecting with her is what increases that trust. It's what builds the trust. And I think it's such a beautiful, sort of symbiotic thing that we have to come to the table. And if we're not making the time to come to the table to sit down with our inner voice and to listen to what she has to say, then how could we ever trust that, because we're not even paying attention to it.
Yes. And I think one of the hardest things about learning to get in touch with her, there's a lot of discernment that goes into this, because when we start doing the inner work of, hearing our inner dialogue, there's usually a lot of fear, there's a lot of self-doubt, there's a lot of insecurity, and sometimes we can misinterpret that as our truth, telling us not to do something. So even starting to discern between fear and intuition is a really important process for each of us, and it's very unique for each of us. And what I have found is that my truth has it just has a different quality to it. There isn't really any need to justify or to prove or to argue. It just is. And I can always tell fear because that has a whole list of things of why we shouldn't do things.
It's pretty smart, that fear.
Oh, it's incredibly smart, but that's not wisdom.
Right.
And learning to discern that for yourself is a really key piece, I think, to learning to trust your inner voice and where it's guiding you to go.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is all so good. And I have to tell you, I am a big journaler. My listeners know that. And I have a free journaling program for people to get started. So I love this. But honestly, the idea of writing in my journal with my left hand instead of my right hand.
Does it bring up your perfectionism a little bit?
Oh my Lord. And I kind of just had to laugh at myself because my thought was, I should try that. And then my next immediate thought was, I'm going to have to get a different journal to do that.
Well, you know what? That's actually what I recommend. And I recommend that you get an unlined journal.
Yeah.
Because having lines actually, it does something in our brain that we're supposed to write on the lines. And if you get an unlined journal, it gives you permission to write wherever you want. And as you are writing with your non-dominant hand, my non-dominant hand's my left hand too. It starts off very much chicken scratch, and it will bring up your perfectionism. But that in and of itself is actually such a powerful experience of learning to give yourself grace and compassion, and not just yourself, this other part of yourself who you haven't talked to for a while, who you've kind of abandoned in a way, who you've locked away, you haven't trusted. And you'll see her handwriting actually improve the more that she gets to practice and be with you. It's just such a really cool process. It really, really is.
Well, and you know what's really interesting? This thought of that for many of us, and I think I'm included in this because I did not have a wild teenage or college years. I feel like my wild little girl probably never even learned how to write.
Now that is something, isn't it?
Yeah. And so it makes a lot of sense when you think
Well,
of it.
what's really interesting, so when I started doing, so this is for all of you who do not have that rebellious period of your life like I do. So what has happened is that you learned these rules very early on. All of us did. By the time we are 5 or 6, we are already following rules of what it means to be enough in the world as women and as us individually within our family systems. Every single little girl and little boy, for that matter, grows up with an idea of who they think they need to be in order to be enough. And enough is a space holder for any other word: happy, successful, whatever it is that you feel like you are chasing or the pressure is on, whatever that is in your family system. So if you don't have this rebellious side of you that you can totally tap into very clearly, then I encourage you to go back to the 5, 6, 7-year-old you who was starting to follow these rules. What rules was she aware of back then? When did she start to change? When did she start to follow who the world wanted her to be instead of simply be who she is?
Yeah, that's really good. I know I've done a lot of deep work, inner child work like this, and it's really helped me understand where a lot of those beliefs about who I needed to be were created. Oh, that's why. And when you look at them from the perspective, for me, of 43 years, it's so much easier to understand and to make a different meaning out of that. And
that's important.
Yeah. And I think that it's something that we should all do.
I agree. And what the process really needs to be is you have to rewrite your own rules.
Right. Yeah.
And you also have to forgive the people who gave you the rules to begin with. And that's been a really huge permission piece in my own work of really realizing these people, they were trying to love you the best way they knew how with the rules that they had been handed down. Mm-hmm. And this is, it just gets passed down from generation to generation to generation until somebody decides to stop it. And that is an opportunity that all of us have of really looking at the rules that we're following and starting to live by different rules today. And one of the things that I have found, and when we're creating change in our present life, we can do all the inner work and inner child work we want, but if nothing changes in the actual day-to-day life what we're creating now, then there's no point. So really giving yourself permission to do things differently and understand that there's going to be risk and discomfort involved with that.
Hey, you guys, I just wanted to pop in real quick to let you know about something new I have for you, and this is the perfect time to do it. I love what Megan just said about how if you really want change in your life, you have to give yourself permission to do things differently. We've all had that experience of having a big dream or a big goal, but then not feeling like we followed through on it, or maybe we even gave up before we even got started. Sometimes, or a lot of the time, we just need more support to really push through that fear and start taking the inspired action our inner voice is asking us to take. If this is you, I want to invite you to join my inner circle. Imagine the power of group coaching plus mastermind style accountability groups to support you in doing something different and taking that big action or even the small steps needed to be aligned with your soul's true purpose. And here's the thing. If you're listening to this podcast, I know you are the kind of woman I want and need in my inner circle. You are driven and smart and have so much inspired potential. You are amazing and you have so much to give to this world. I want to be there with you as you take these steps to start and keep on living in alignment with your inner voice. If you are ready to put your ideas into action, join me in the inner circle. The doors are open and will be closing September 18th, 2017. So head on over to kellycovert.com/inner circle to learn more and join. If you are listening to this after that date, you can still head on over there and put your name on the wait list, and I will notify you the next time the doors are open. That's kellycovert.com/inner circle, all one word, or you can just click the link in the show notes of your podcast app. Totally. I tell everyone that when you start to get that uncomfortable fear, anxiety, those are such good signs.
Yes.
Because it shows you're growing and that you're coming out of that stuck place. And that should be a really exciting time. And it will still be scary, but we can also view it in a different way.
Yes, and I think one of the things that I just wrapped up on Wild and Holy Radio is a 3-part series talking about expansion, which is exactly this topic. Like, how do we shift into this wilder version of ourselves, of being more true to who we are? And one of the things that I mention all the time to my clients in life, everywhere, is that every single step you take matters. And I think a lot of times we stop ourselves from taking these small steps because we feel like we have to take these big leaps. And the big leaps create a lot of anxiety and fear for us. So just take the small steps instead, because those small steps, they build up to the big leaps. And the smaller steps that we take in courage, the more courageous we become.
Yeah. And that also builds our trust. Like going back to that idea of trusting when our inner voice tells us to do something, do a small thing. And you see that it was the right thing. And then you're like, okay, that gives me that trust to do the next thing. I love that.
Yes.
Speaking of Wild and Holy Radio, I know that you had another podcast, the Enoughness Revolution, before this. And I'm really interested for you to share a story, sort of a recent story for you, where you really had to tap into that trust and kind of bump up against the fear. Because I think sometimes, when people are listening to someone like you who has been in this work for a really long time and can speak so beautifully and eloquently about it, they think, well, it's not really hard for her. And I think it's really important for us to hear from people like you about recent circumstances that have challenged you. So can you share sort of the story of that with us?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for all those kind words. That means a lot to me. So I'm part of a podcast mastermind, which we meet every other week we've been meeting for over 6 months now. And it's a really great group of women. And I've been running the Enoughness Revolution for almost 2 years. We have 150 episodes, an established audience, a lot of content. And for the metric-based version of success, the Enoughness Revolution is a successful podcast. And I remember coming to my podcast group probably around February, because I had started writing my book, Wild and Holy, and something was calling me. And it was I think I need to start a new podcast. And everybody in the mastermind was like, don't do that. Why would you do that? You have a successful podcast on the Enoughness Revolution. Just rebrand. And so I'm taking their feedback and I'm like, well, is that the right decision? Should I just rebrand? Would it be dumb to start from scratch? I mean, I have done a lot of work up to this point. Was it the right move to let this go and start something new? And I really went back and forth for a while because, these girls in my mastermind, I respect them. They all run successful podcasts. They know what they're doing. I think that they were offering sound advice. But as I sat with it, there was that voice that said, you need this to be its own thing, Megan. And you need to honor what the Enoughness Revolution was. It's its own body of work. It was a very powerful conversation on cultivating worthiness. But the one piece you didn't speak about is how we make peace with our own divinity, how we define God on our own terms, our own spirituality on our own terms, how we learn to trust our intuition. This is such a big piece of cultivating enoughness. You have to start its own thing, Wild and Holy Radio. So I remember going back to my podcast mastermind. I said, so I'm going to start a new podcast. And they were like, what? I'm like, yep, that's the decision. And as they've watched me do this, they have all said, each one of them, like, that was so the right move for you. I'm so glad you didn't listen to us. But it's in those moments when you are getting really sound advice from people that you respect and you admire, that is telling you to do the opposite of what you're feeling called to do, that you really have to dig down deep and give your inner voice the credit that it deserves. It's guiding you. It's telling you something. It's not letting you go from something for a very specific reason. And if you were to let success be a determining factor of doing something or not versus honoring that truth that's coming up for you, I think that we are going to misstep a lot of honoring the successful path versus the true path that we're being called to walk on, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that it's so important, like I said, for us to hear that this is an ongoing practice for all of us. We're all going to be always faced with these decisions of status quo or growth, transformation, evolving upward. And with you, it was this idea of rebranding. You could rebrand your podcast, which is just sort of like recreate the old podcast into something new, or you could create something completely new. And I think that's so easy to apply to even different situations. Going back to school to do something completely out of your field, getting a job that's completely unrelated to the job that you had before. Quitting your job to be a stay-at-home mom. Like all of these things, I think, are decisions that as women that we really face. And it's so easy just to ask, well, what should I do?
Oh, yeah, it is. But we also need, I think in a very real sense, we need encouragement and validation from other people too. And one of the things that I think the self-help world does a really poor job at is it encourages people to be silos and not need validation from other people. And they actually shame you for needing validation from other people. And I am so totally against that. Like, we need mirrors. We need mirrors to give us permission sometimes that we can't give ourselves. And that's why, when I was going through that time of really digging in, like, what's the right decision? I was talking to some friends about it who know me. They know, my life path. They know so much more about listening to this inner voice. And, they were those mirrors for me that helped me give myself the permission that I fully needed to stand in that decision and go for it. And we need those people. So even if you're getting the wrong, or not wrong, but different advice from people you respect, make sure that you're talking to other people too, and not only accepting that as the only feedback you're getting when you're making a big decision like this.
So let's talk about this idea of getting validation from other people, because I totally hear what you're saying, but I also feel that there are so many women that will that's all they're ever seeking is that external validation, and that they don't give themselves any validation from within. So how do you teach the balance of that?
For me, it's really about, and I can always tell, and this shows up so many times in my life, I've already made the decision for me.
Yeah.
I'm just calling to have somebody else say, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. I'm probably going to go ahead and make that decision anyway. I've already arrived at what the right choice is. That validation is just that little extra nudge of saying, yes, you're right, when I'm really, really scared. And I think that if we start talking to other people before we've arrived at this decision before, then we're not giving ourselves the space and time to decide what is best for us. So it's really about the process. I think if we start seeking validation when we're in a state of high confusion, we're not giving ourselves the space and time to look within for our own answers. And I see this a lot. And I even have clients that try and lean on me for this, and I'll point them back towards themselves first to really sit in what do you feel is right for you. Because if we're seeking other people's version of right for us before we give ourselves the opportunity to say what's right for us, then we aren't honoring our own validation. We're leaning on others to make decisions for us, and we will never, ever have a happy, fully expressed life if we're letting other people make those big decisions for our life path.
And our soul knows that. Like our soul feels it so intensely. And I tell women it's that feeling of like complete dissatisfaction, utter just like it's almost like you're disgusted with yourself that you can't figure things out. And that's not, that feeling is not, oh, I hate myself. I think some people interpret that. That feeling is you're not being you. You're not aligned with what your soul's asking you to be.
And I think that we also have a lot of unrealistic expectations that we're supposed to know the answers all the time.
Right.
And so when we're confused, it's really easy for us to think, oh, other people don't go through this. Other people don't experience this. There must be something wrong with me because I don't know the next right step. And nothing is wrong with you. Like we know what we need to know when we need to know it. So if you don't know yet, it's not your time to know. So learn how to sit with that discomfort, learn how to own that discomfort. And when somebody says, hey, what's next for you? I don't know. I'm really digging in and feeling that out for myself. That is a perfectly acceptable answer. Yeah. And I think for so many of us, we have been taught to believe like the answer, I don't know, is not acceptable, especially like as an adult. Because from a very early age, I mean, from 5 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? You're supposed to have an answer for that. And, no, we don't really know. So learning to give yourself space and time to be in that in-between, I think is really crucial. But as humans, being in that uncertainty is highly uncomfortable. So that's where like a lot of vulnerability comes in for us, of giving ourselves the grace and compassion to be in this in-between space and trusting the huge component of trust that the answer will come, because it always, always, always will. Right.
It's almost like we just have to surrender our need to be in control of everything.
Yes, and surrender. It's interesting that you bring that up, because the reason most of us have a difficult time surrender is because we don't know who we're surrendering to or to what. And that is all about having a relationship with that thing that is bigger than you, that you can surrender, because you cannot surrender to something that you don't trust or you don't know.
Right. Yes. So bringing it back to holy, because I feel like that is a perfect transition. How do we, as individuals, discover what is holy for us?
This is such a good question. So the word holy brings up a whole lot of emotions for people. And it's going to greatly depend on what your background is, how you were raised. Does it have a religious influence? Does it have a spiritual influence? I think for the people who kind of are in my world, they're seekers. They know that there's something bigger outside of themselves, and they really want to have a deep relationship with that something outside of themselves. And so holy for me has really been learning to define that thing outside of myself and build a strong relationship with it, knowing that I'm a part of that. There is no separation in that. So when I am listening to my inner voice, that is a divine inspiration. There is no separation between my intuition and divine guidance. It's the exact same thing. So giving yourself permission to explore your spirituality, giving yourself permission to define God or source or spirit or the divine, whatever the universe, whatever word feels right for you, is a really big piece of discovering your own holiness, your wholeness, your oneness with this thing outside of you. And here's the really difficult thing about this. when we come from religious upbringings like I did, most religions are patriarchal, first and foremost, so we don't have a feminine, thing that we're looking towards to model ourselves after. So there's a hole there that we actually have to create for ourselves. We have to find the divine feminine in us, and in that something outside of ourselves. And then also, religions actually encourage you to only follow one path. And it's very black and white, and spirituality is so much vaster than black and white. So wild and holy, underneath all that ampersand, that and sign between wild and holy is really important, because it tells you that you can be both and. Religion might be a place where you start, but it might not be the full truth for you. Maybe you want a deeper connection with God or the universe, and a spiritual practice will help you do that. And I think for a lot of us, we feel like, well, if we're not religious, then we have to be something else. And I've definitely been on that path myself. I left church to go totally into spirituality, and now I found myself back in church while still practicing my spirituality. And what I have found is there's been a whole lot of freedom in that, of me developing my own sense of spirituality, my sense of self, and how this relates to the higher thing outside of myself. So there's a lot here. And for some women, it can feel kind of rebellious to explore something that you weren't taught to believe, for instance. But that's where the wild part comes in, is you have to go with where you're feeling called, and trusting that where you are being called is something that is divine. It's calling you towards something else. It's calling you towards something deeper. And we have to give ourselves permission to explore that, even if it feels bad or wrong.
So beautiful. And Megan, I just want to honor and acknowledge you for this work that you're doing, because you're really building a bridge for women to understand what this is. And so many of us need that, because we don't know how to navigate the waters below, and it feels scary. And so we need the bridge makers like you. And I just thank you for doing the work that you were put here on this earth to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I've run from it for a very long time. And when it comes to truth, it's like your truth will always rise. You can never outrun it. It'll continue to present itself to you until you're ready to listen.
Funny how that happens.
And I know, but that's how, I use the word God because that's what feels good for me at this point. I used to not use the word God for years and years and years because it held way too much connotation to it. So when I'm saying that word, you might think I'm talking about one thing, but it's very something personal to me. But that was what God has called me to do, is to not let me run from that truth of saying your spiritual journey is one of the most important pieces of your life story, and other women want to have this deep relationship with me, and I need you to create a space that's safe for them to explore that. So wild and holy is many things. It's giving yourself permission to be your fullest expression, to live your truth, to learn how to trust it. That is a big component, but also doing that spiritual work of learning how to build that relationship with that something outside of yourself, so you can surrender, so you can have faith, because I have found there's such a deep parallel between our ability to trust that something bigger outside of ourselves and trusting ourselves.
Yes. Amen, sister. I feel like I'm in church right now. This is such a good stuff.
Let's go to church, girl. It's our own kind of church.
Yeah, let's bring it. Megan, this has been so wonderful. And I would love for you to share with my listeners how they can connect with you on social media and on the internet to find all of your goodness that is out there.
Yes. So you can find me at megan-hale.com. Both of my podcasts are linked on my website, or you can find them on iTunes, The Enoughness Revolution, or wildandholyradio.com. And I also have a retreat coming up in September in Austin. And I don't know if this episode will air before then, but if you have liked some of the things that Kelly and I have talked about, and you want to dig into this work a little bit and just come and be in a really safe container with like-minded women, just be who you are and kind of do this work of being your fullest expression and learning to trust yourself, Wild and Holy Weekend would be a beautiful opportunity for you to check that out. And you can learn more at wildandholyweekend.com.
And this podcast will be coming out right before that. I think just a couple of weeks before that. And so I'm sure you're going to have more, right, Megan?
Yes. So I'm having a baby in January.
So congratulations.
So thank you. So I'll actually be taking a break from my retreats. I will be doing, I'm planning a live event for June. It's going to be called Wild and Holy Live or Wild and Holy Women Live. Haven't decided on the name yet, but it'll be in Austin, Texas. So by the time this podcast episode airs, there will be a page for you to go and check that out and just get on the wait list to learn more if you want to come to that event.
And I'll put links to all of those things on the show notes page at kellycovert.com. So that is fantastic. So Megan, one last question for you before we let you go today. And that is, in your life right now, what is your inner voice saying to you?
Be braver.
Whew. I got goosebumps when you said that.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was reading that question before we went live and that was not the answer. But after this conversation, the answer has changed.
Oh yeah. Like literally my hair on my head is standing on end. That is powerful. And I can't wait to see what that courage will bring because I know it's going to be something amazing.
This was wonderful, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me on.
I have to be honest with you, you guys. There are days when I sit back and I think, I can hardly believe this is my job. Seriously, I am so lucky to be able to have these conversations with amazing women like Megan, and I'm so glad that I can share them with you. I really want to encourage all of you to try to do a little of the non-dominant hand journaling like Megan was talking about. After we recorded this interview, I went out and I bought myself a new journal with blank pages. Like I ever really need an excuse to buy a new journal. Like seriously, I have a problem. But I went out and bought myself a new journal with outlines and I started practicing this way of journaling, and it's really something else. It's super cool and it's challenging. Like it's bringing up a lot of stuff like we talked about, like my perfectionism, and it just takes a lot longer than I'm used to things taking. And I really feel like there's lessons to be learned in all of that. So really take that in and go put that into practice today and see how it works for you. Thank you so much for listening today. I really want you guys to know how grateful I am that you choose to listen to In Her Voice as you go about your day, and that you come back to listen, and that you're sharing with your friends. It really means so much to me. And the next time you have a moment, first take a deep breath. And then I want you to click on over to Instagram and come hang out with me there. I'm at Kelly J. Covert, and I would really love to connect with you. I'd love to see your face and to see my listeners because I hardly ever get to see you. So connect with me over there in a visual way, and I really look forward to getting to know you even better. Always remember, we need you, all of you, showing up in this world. We need your unique gifts and qualities. We need you taking inspired action, taking these steps, big and small, towards being in alignment with your soul, being in alignment with what your inner voice is asking you to do. Never forget this. You are worthy.